So, hello everyone, welcome to this webinar. Thank you very much once again for joining us today. My name is Nerea Perez and I'm a member of the admissions team for Deusto Business School. In collaboration with IMD, today we have the pleasure of learning about the art of leadership with Professor Shlomo Ben Hur. Welcome, Shlomo. This webinar will be based on his book, Changing Employee Behaviour, that has been also recently launched in Spain as Cambiando el comportamiento de los empleados para aquellos que lo queráis leer en la versión en español. The webinar will last 1 hour. After the speech delivered by our expert, we will open a live Q&A section. As I mentioned before, you have to write in the Q&A as the chat is not connected. You can type your comments and questions through the session. At the end of the webinar, Professor Shlomo will answer all your questions. Also, this session is going to be recorded and we will send it to you by the end of the week. Shlomo Ben Hur is a professor of leadership, organization, and corporate learning. He's the director of EMD Transformative Leadership Program for top executives, cultivating leadership energy through awareness and reflection. He's also directing the Organization Learning in Action Program for Chief Learning Officers, the Changing Employee Behaviour online program, and the EMD Discovery Trips to the Startup Nation, Israel. Prior to joining the EMD, Professor Ben Hur gained 20 years of corporate experience in senior executive positions in multinational organizations. Professor Ben Hur received his doctoral degree in psychology from Humboldt University in Berlin. He holds a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology and a bachelor degree in psychology and political science from Bar-Ilan University in Israel. Welcome, Shlomo.
Thank you very much, Nerea, and good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to be with you here. I'll just put my sharing of the screen on to make sure that you see what I see. So let me just go to that. Yeah, can you see my slides, Nerea?
Yes, we can see your slides. Perfect. Now,
I hope that you're all well and that your dear ones are healthy and are staying safe in this period of time. This has been quite a phenomenal period if we're looking just at the last few months in which we've been in the COVID-19 kind of like a world. If I'm just thinking about March, in which sort of like if you're looking at the VIX, it was amazing to see that's the highest level ever in the history of the recorded VIX measurements. And what was amazing is it was lingering like that for a number of months now, which shows that we're really in this incredibly challenging and different time in which even Wall Street did not know how to handle the situation or how to project it. And if we're looking at a whole range of companies that you may be coming from, some of you may be coming from companies that are still in the crisis. Some of you might actually be moving towards recovery. I mean, you're seeing sort of like the light at the end of the tunnel. Some of you might be going through regression in many ways. And I think one of the things that unites all of us at this point is that the fact that we need to change our behaviors. And I would argue that whether you're a leader of multi-billion-dollar business with thousands of people reporting to you, or you're just running a new startup in some parts of Spain or somewhere in the world, part of what your role is as a leader is to help people change their behaviors. And you're doing that not in a manipulation of other people, but in order to support them, in order to try to maximize their contribution and to improve the line of your business. And in many ways, we don't call this behavioral change. We use other words. We describe it as feedback or coaching or mentoring. We talk about engaging in developmental and learning activities. But when you're thinking about what it is that you're doing as a leader with your people, is that you are trying to help them change their behavior by helping them build essential skills, or by supporting them in stopping to do a specific behavior that's not very useful for them. And I would argue that one of the things that we're sure about in this very unsure and uncertain time that we're operating within is that in the post-COVID-19 world, we will need to be very good as managers in supporting behavioral change in organizations to allow businesses to succeed. So if you were just thinking about something that we probably all have heard of, if not experienced firsthand, when we're thinking about behavioral changes, the ritual of New Year's resolution. You may have made those when 2020 just started. You may have been standing in the main square in Madrid or Barcelona or Lisboa, wherever it is that you are. Maybe you were with friends. You were sort of like cheering to the new year that was coming. And in your heart of hearts, you made a resolution for the new year. You said, in this year, I want to do X or Y. And it's interesting to find that in 50 to 60% of cultures, people make New Year's resolution. Just the fact that we have a change in the number in the calendar is making us quite emotional and seeing a new beginning starting and committing to something. And for most people, what we see when we're looking across 60% of the cultures is that they think about getting fit. So maybe they didn't do this in the 19th century, but more and more people are saying, I want to get into shape physically, stopping to smoke. And many people talk about improving personal finance, like fixing their financial situation. So I want you to think about a time that you tried to change your own behavior. Hopefully it's something that you did 2 years ago or 3 or 4 years ago. So don't think just about the last year. And something that you wanted to change in your behavior in a deliberate kind of a way. And it could be anything from I want to read more books to I want to improve the relationship with my boss, with my mother, with my lover. I mean, whoever it is in your life. And try to think about how did you go about this? How did you make that change in your behavior? And how successful were you? And I'm going to ask you in your Q&A to just put your percentage of success. And when you're putting the percentage, it has to be from 0 to 100%. And it's what defines it as successful is that you've sustained this new behavior for at least 1 year after you made that commitment. So for 1 full year, you really stuck to that. So if you said, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week, that you did it for a whole year. Or you wanted to improve your bank financing, you did this for a whole year. So let me just go to the Q&A and just put the number that you think you had succeeded in on a 0 to 100. So I see that Mercedes already put her number. I mean, just for the rest of you, just think about that. This is what I wanted to change. This is how I went about it. And this is how successful I was on a scale of 1 to 100. Okay, interesting. So we're seeing Galder, who has been very successful in that at 100%. But really what is fascinating to see is that there's many of you that are giving 40, 45%. Oscar gave it 80%. Hector gave it 60%. We have Mercedes that is giving 20%. Jose Francisco is doing 50%. This is quite amazing, right? I mean, this is something that we're so committed to, and we're saying in the New Year's resolution we want to be successful in, but most of us are actually not. What is interesting when you look at the research behind this phenomena, what we see is that sustaining behavioral change is quite difficult. When we look at statistical information, after 1 week, over 75% say that they're still doing well. I feel always compelled to ask what happened to the other 25% that already after 1 week are not successful. Then after 2 months, it's 64%, 6 months, it's 46%. And after 2 years, less than 12% say that they've succeeded. And for me, that is quite a fascinating phenomena when it comes to our own behavior. But when you're thinking about yourself as a manager, if changing one's own behavior is tough, could you imagine how difficult it is for you to change somebody else's behavior? And this is kind of like what we try to study at IMD here in the business school in Switzerland that I'm part of, in a global survey and study and interviews that we've done with top executives that have been in my program that Nerea mentioned. I'm managing a program which is a 12-month program called CLEAR for top executives. I've been on other programs at IMD. And what we learned from people is that they're quite clear about the behavioral changes that they want to initiate with their direct reports. It's about the direct reports' drive, it's about their management skills, it's about their attitude. And what was interesting is that 76% of them said, we're confident that we can identify the right issues and the right behavior that need to change. Only around 50% of the times, they said that they think that the attempts to change actually work. And what is fascinating for us, which is consistent with what we have seen with the New Year's resolution, but even at a more severe level, is that less than 10% actually are confident that this behavioral change would sustain itself over time. And this was fascinating for me. I mean, as a psychologist, I mean, I was kind of like looking at this and I thought, like, what's wrong? Like, why is that so complicated? If you were saying these are the behaviors that need to change, you're actually embarking on that change of behavior, you're helping and coaching your people with that, why is it not sustainable? And that's when we started doing interviews, and we did it one-way, mirroring, watching conversations between bosses and their direct reports. We asked them to report on that. And what we found is that managers use a very limited skill set, which is practically just two steps. They identify the behavior that needs to change, and then they try to resolve it by giving advice, giving feedback. This is quite a limited repertoire when you're thinking about the complexity of what this is all about. There are some organizations that actually implemented a coaching model, and they've been teaching their managers to say, you need to do more than that. Some of you may have heard about the GROW model for coaching, and there's some other similar models. And they said, you need to explore, you need to identify, you need to plan for it. But still, when we were interviewing and observing these managers, we saw that it falls into primarily these two areas of identifying and resolving the issues. And what most organizations are missing out on is what we know is the most important thing when it comes to changing of behaviors, I mean, from the psychology field, that is the context. And the context is a very, very critical component, which means the environment and the conditions in which the behavioral change happens. The context is what the person brings in as an individual and what is going on in their environment, from the company culture to the strategy to the customers to all of that. And we know in psychology and in criminology that context is what makes a huge difference. If you're looking just at prisoners, for instance, you might know that between 40 to 60% of people who come out of jail end up going back to jail. I mean, this is quite a sad statistics, but it's very true. And what we're finding in criminology, when we're looking at why people reoffend and go back to jail, is that it depends heavily on the context that they go to. If they go back to their old friends, to their own home, old home, and if they don't have a job, they end up with a very high probability back in jail within a period of 6 months. If we look at prisoners of war, for instance, that happened in research that was taking place in the Korean War. American prisoners of war that were in North Korea ended up with all of the torture that they've gone through and the brainwashing that they've gone through, almost like devout communists. When they came back to the United States for the first month, when they were interviewed, they were really talking like committed, sort of like communists from North Korea. But after 3 months, only 180 days in the United States with their family members, in which their context has changed, they really sort of like undid the brainwashing that they've been subject to. And we see that also with alcoholism, with drug addiction, even with depression, that more than the treatment that people are subject to, what matters more than anything about whether they would fall back to alcoholism or to drug addiction is whether or not they will stay in the same context or whether they will change to a different context. So if you want to develop and change a behavior of your direct reports or even your own, the context has to act like a life support machine for this new behavior that you're trying to implement. But when we looked at the context in the workplace, and this is research that we've been doing for 4 years, and we interviewed a lot of leaders and a lot of direct reports, and we observed them with their direct reports. What we saw is a phenomenon that we never see in social sciences. So as a social scientist, I deal with a very messy world, the world of people. And when it comes to people, and when it comes to bosses and direct reports, it is two individuals that are interacting with each other. There's usually very low correlations, even if they're significant one. But in this case of boss direct report, what we found is that over 90% of bosses, which is a huge number for us in social sciences, when they start dealing with their direct reports, they instinctively divide their subordinates to those who they can rely on for help, which is what we call the in-group in our book, and those that they turn less likely to turn to for help, which is what we call the out-group in the book. And in spite of the fact that we say that it takes years to establish a relationship between a boss and a direct report, this happens in the first month, the first 30 days of working together. And it tends to last for the duration of the relationship. So if I'm a new boss coming into a new team and I'm starting to meet with my people, subconsciously, without realizing this, I start dividing the people to in-group, out-group, in-group, out-group. And what we see and what we argue in the book based on our research is that this establishes prototypes for distinguishing stronger and weaker performers for the duration of the relationship. So when we interviewed and studied the prototypes that are emerging from 5,000 managers and their direct reports, when we were asking them to describe the strong performer, the person that they saw as part of their in-group, they described them as more motivated, as proactive, as people who are innovative. They used them as sparring partner with whom they shared a lot of information, and they saw them as better leaders of their teams. When they were asked to describe their out-group people, they described them as weaker performers, as more defensive people, as people who tend to keep everything close to their chest, power, information, authority. And they're people who at the maximum will do what they ask them to do, but never go beyond the call of duty. Now, when they were asked to describe their behavior towards each one of those groups, each one of those individuals on their teams, that was quite fascinatingly consistent. To the strong performers, they always explained the what and the why. They gave them the big picture. They were very open to their ideas. They shared more information with them. They were available to them when they needed them, and they assigned more and more tasks and increased their visibility in the organization. When they were asked to describe the weaker performers, unlike the strong performers to whom they explained the what and the why, when it came to their weak performers, they discussed the how. They pushed down their ideas on them. They established KPIs. They were monitoring their actions, and they tended to be less patient with them, even if they spent more time with them. And what we argue in this book is that this very behavior by the manager is creating a context for the direct report that sets subordinates for long-term success or failure. That in fact, when your direct report is not delivering very good performance, many times it has to do with you. I'm not saying that you are the only one that is deciding on that, but that you as a manager have a very, very critical role that you play on whether they flourish or they fail. By the way, this is also true not for just employees, that's true for children also. It's true for spouses, it's true for significant others and for people that you're working with them. That the way that you set your expectations and the way that you establish stereotypes is actually determining the success or failures of that relationship of those people. And it starts on a very positive side in what we call the Pygmalion effect. Pygmalion, if those of you who studied Greek mythology might remember, was a sculptor in old Greece. And he sculpted this beautiful maiden, a beautiful woman made in stone. And he loved her so much that she actually came out of the stone and she became his lover. And 2,000, 3,000 years later, it was George Bernard Shaw who did this movie that you might be familiar with that is called My Fair Lady or Pygmalion. And it was the story of Liza Doolittle. Liza Doolittle was a flower girl. And she was played by Audrey Hepburn. By the way, Audrey Hepburn is an American actress that was living for 45 years just across from our offices here at IMD in Lausanne, in Switzerland. And she plays this woman who is sitting to sell flowers on the staircase of the Covent Garden Opera House in central London. And coming out of the Opera House is Professor Higgins, who's a professor of linguistics, and his friend Admiral Pickering, who is an admiral in the Navy. And he hears her selling flowers. And as a professor of linguistics, he turns to his friend and he says, you know, if you just give me this subhuman creature, he doesn't describe her as a girl or as a woman, but as a subhuman creature, for 3 months, I promise you that I will turn her into a lady, he says. And his wish is being granted because this woman needs a house. I mean, she needs good food, and he has a wonderful house in Mayfair in central London. He has a chef that cooks all of her meals. He gives her a beautiful room with a view to the garden. But she pays handsomely for this treatment because he puts ice cubes in her mouth, and he has her go up and down the stairs with books on her head, singing crazy songs like The Rain That Rained on the Plain in Spain, by the way. And this funny song is supposed to improve her diction. And then after a few months, 3 months actually, she's invited to the palace for a big ball. And she's being escorted by Admiral Pickering, who is this admiral from the Navy, who is walking her into to the dance floor when they announce their names, and he starts dancing the waltz with her. And she turns to him and she said, you know, Admiral Pickering, to Professor Higgins, until the day that I die, I will be this subhuman creature that he met on the staircase of the Covent Garden Opera House. But you believed in me from the very beginning. And because you believed in me, I actually sort of like blossoming now, and I'm able to step into this royal palace and dance with all of these dignitary people. So she goes on to say that the difference between a lady and a flower girl is not how she behaves, but how she's treated. And I would argue that if that's true for flower girls, it's true for people in general, and it might be very true for your employees, the people who report to you also. And if I'm not convincing you with these kind of like strange stories from the Greek mythology or from movies, then I would say that there's solid evidence of research about Pygmalion effect in children, for instance. When we look at children and the studies of children, Professor Rosenthal from Harvard University spent 45 years of his life studying the Pygmalion effect in these children. He will come together with his group of researchers to different classes around the United States. It started in the Oak School District in Chicago, and then repeatedly they did this all over the United States. They would do an IQ test for the kids in the school. And then they will not look at the results of the IQ test, but they would divide the class randomly into two lists. One list is the average students, so 1/2, and the second list will be what they define as late bloomers. And they describe late bloomers as children that experience a new spurt of intellectual development. Now, these were children between the age of 9 and 11. And those of you who have children or have observed other people's children, you know that this is a time in which your developmental cognition is still being developed. So your IQ is still being developed. So what they did is that they would go away for a whole year, and then they would come back after 12 full months, and they would test the kids again. And they would do an IQ test again, and then they would open the 2 envelopes for each child, and they would compare the first IQ test and the second IQ test. The expectation was obviously that all children would increase their IQ after 12 months of studies. But what was fascinating to the researchers that they found that where the average kids had an increase of only 10 points in the IQ, the late bloomer kids got an increase of 27.4 points in the IQ. And the only way that they were able to explain this was through the label that they gave to the teacher on those random lists that they assigned to them. Because once the teacher heard the correct answer for a test or for a question coming from an average kid, she or he will say, they probably stole it from one of the other kids in the room, or it was just by fluke that they did this. But when they heard it from the late bloomer kids, they said, children, did you hear what this brilliant kid said? I mean, can you repeat this, please? And then that kid would get a much more increased motivation and increased self-esteem that would actually allow them to increase their level of IQ. And Professor Dov Eden from Tel Aviv University has seen that with Army cadets that have gained a tremendous amount of Pygmalion effect as they were in officers' course. And we see that in the business context where high leader expectations augment the direct report self-efficacy, it increases their motivation and effort, and it improves performance. And obviously what we're more worried about is the negative side of that, is the fact that bosses' negative expectation could set subordinates up to fail by constraining their behavior, by constraining their performance, by giving them more routine tasks, by establishing tight monitoring on them, by not giving them a lot of room for delegations, by the fact that they start acting with fear, and because they're fearful, they don't tell the boss about problems that may emerge, and then the boss starts developing a perception that with this person, there's always nasty surprises. And subordinates' confidence and motivation is eroded through a result of that. And then even when the boss comes to help them and says, can I help you? They don't really believe that he or she wants to help them. They believe that they don't trust them, that they actually have lower expectations. And therefore their self-esteem deteriorates even further. They feel then unappreciated and they start avoiding the boss. And then the boss starts wondering about, like, where is this person? And we're talking about this not because we're saying that everybody could be brilliant, that everybody's going to be a genius. There's always going to be a normal distribution. We're talking about this because with the same people on your team, with the same people in your organization, if you only change your attitude as a manager and realize the important role that you play, you could extract almost 20% more performance, the same way that the teacher extracted 20% more IQ. So you, as leaders, are the architect of development and change. And what we find from all of our research is that within that context of people's work and performance, the single most influential factor in a person working context is the relationship with their manager. So changing the context, changing the behavior of the manager could actually increase performance and deliverables in organizations substantially. And this is what this book was after, kind of like trying to look at how can you change the behaviors of employees based on all of the tools that we know from psychology that managers might not be very familiar with. So both my co-author Nick Kinley, who is based in London, and myself are both psychologists, and we looked at all of what we know in the field of psychology in the last 100 years. And we had only one test for things that we included in the book, and that was what we called the 10-minute test. We said, if the manager could do this in 10 minutes, then we would include this technique in the book. And if they can't do it in 10 minutes, we would not. Because we know that you're very busy managers. You don't have a sofa in your office and you can't start asking people about their mother and their childhood. But what you could do is you could help them change behaviors through a whole range of tactics. And we divided this book that focuses on tactics to the inner and the outer context of what makes people work and tick. And we call it the MAPS model, that stands for motivation, then for ability, psychological capital, and supportive environment. These are the four. And for each one of those areas, there's 1 or 2 chapters in the book that provide you with techniques on how you can impact people's motivation or people's ability or their level of psychological capital in terms of the deeper stuff that's going on in their psychology, and establish a supportive environment for them to create the change and make it happen. So in the few moments that we have today, I thought I would just say a few words about motivation, because this is really the gatekeeper. This is about what makes people tick. Because what we know is that if you're motivated to behavioral change, if you're motivated to change your behavior, it would increase your concentration, it would increase the amount of effort that you will put into it, and it would also make you enjoy this change more. It would make you innovate in it and initiate it, and it would certainly increase your performance and improve it. So when we investigated with managers and we asked them, what do you do to motivate people, or how do you look at motivation? What was interesting is that they talked primarily about what we call in the research extrinsic motivation. That is the money that I could give you in your merit increase, or the bonus payout, or a tap on the shoulder, like to say, great, you did a good job. But in fact, when we look at research, what we see is that the majority of people do not get as motivated by extrinsic motivation as they are by intrinsic motivation, by what makes them tick as individuals. Now, I could spend a whole week talking about this. I mean, this is research that I feel very passionate about. But what is fascinating is that if I'm just spending 5 minutes talking to you about intrinsic motivation, it started in the self-determination theory that was developed in the 50s when scholars were studying motivation. And what we saw is that there's 3 different parts that are key motivators for people when it comes to intrinsic motivation. And those are autonomy, mastery, and connection. And what I want is to do a double click on each one of those 3 and to come back to you and to ask you whether you think that one of those might be the motivator in your life, or in the way that you go about tasks, or in the way that you would go about when you wanted to change your behavior. So when it comes to autonomy, which motivates a lot of people, is the sense of being in control and having a choice. This is about feeling that you are your own boss, that you have a big sandbox to play within. And when we look at autonomy, we see that people to whom autonomy is important, when they have autonomy to change their behavior or to learn a new skill, it actually increases the level of sustainability of their efforts. So they would stick to it for a longer time. It increases their performance and goal achievement, and it increases their enjoyment and satisfaction. The second one is what we call mastery. And mastery is the experience of competence and challenge. This is why people could play the same Mozart piece on their piano 100 times. Did you ask yourself sometimes about this? If you're one of those people, and I were to ask you, like, why are you motivated by this? How could you sit at the piano and play the same damn piece again for 100 times? Usually it's a sense of mastery. I feel like I have the expertise. I'm competent in this, and I derive satisfaction from that. That's not because somebody's giving me money, not because somebody's tapping my shoulder. Just the very mastery of the task is motivating for me. The people who are displaying mastery, to whom this is important, are more motivated if they feel competent, especially when it comes to more complex kind of jobs. We have just an hour away from our campus here, this Jura Mountains, where most of the best watches in the world are being made. And if you go to the Jura Mountain to the workshop of Patek Philippe, you will see some people who have glasses like mine, but then a magnifying glass on top of the glasses, and they focus on the upper right hand of the Patek Philippe watch. And they've been doing it for 40 years, and they're thrilled, and they love their job. And that's because mastery is very, very important to them. Now, the last thing is connection. And these are people who are motivated by the sense of being connected. And it could be connected to other people on their job, to their team. It could be connected to their boss. It could be connected to the task. It could be connected to the purpose of the organization. It's a whole range of things of what it is that motivates you. And people to whom connection is important, when they feel connected, they have a sense of purpose that leads them to high performance, to high level of enjoyment and satisfaction, and sustained dedication. So I would like to ask you about your own intrinsic motivation. I want to ask you, which do you think is most important for you? Is it autonomy? Is it mastery, or is it connection? So I know that for all of us, we have a mix of things probably. I want a little bit of autonomy, I want some mastery, but if I put a gun to your head and I'm saying you have to choose only one, which one is the one that you will choose? So I'll give you in a second a chance to answer that. And then the second question that I want to ask you, and I would like to think about this for a moment, is does your current job allow you to satisfy this thing that you're saying is your motivator? Okay, so I'm going to launch a poll now. And in this poll, I'm asking you to which is most important to you? Is it autonomy, mastery, or connection? You click only one of them. And then does your job allow you to satisfy them? Yes or no? Okay, so I'm launching this and I'm hoping that appears in your screen now.
Yes, perfect. It's appearing. So now you can choose the option. Thank you, Shlomo.
Thank you. So it's beautiful to see this distribution, right? I mean, let me end the poll here and I'll share the results with you so you could look at the same results that I'm looking at. When it comes to which one is most important to you, you can see that 33% of you are saying autonomy. That's what matters to me. 18% are saying mastery. I'm one of those pianists. I'm one of those who really would like to see this mastery. And for almost 50% of you, it's about connection. So first of all, this is quite fascinating to see this diversity that exists. And if there is diversity in you dialing in, you could imagine how much of that diversity exists underneath you, in your organizations, among the people who report to you. And then when we think about motivation, when we think about performance of people, it is very, very critical for your performance that you will be actually satisfying your key motivator, right? And what we see is that 20% of you are saying, no, I'm not satisfied with this. So this is 20% of you who are saying, I'm actually walking away from my job feeling that I'm not fulfilling what is really motivating for me. 80% of you are lucky to say is that it is the case. So let me stop sharing the results here and I'll just continue now with discussion here to say that what is important also is to highlight that there's big differences around a lot of the topics that we discuss in the book when it comes to resilience, when it comes to psychological capital, when it comes to motivation, that has to do with the different cultures that people come from, the different age group. What motivates me today is very different than what motivated me 20 years ago or 30 years ago. The gender, we find some clear gender differences. We as psychologists also divide the world to two different groups, the people who play to win and people who play not to lose. I don't know how that resonates with you, but I would imagine that if you're thinking about people that you interact with, if I ask you to put some of them in a group of playing to win versus people who play not to lose, you will probably intuitively will be able to do this, which shows that this is not rocket science. This is actually quite a phenomenon that has to do with our personality makeup. But people get motivated very, very differently on where they fall between these groups. But what I wanted to share with you is actually research that is just looking at people's career aspirations, which is quite interesting. This is research that actually my wife has been involved in. I mean, it was led by Michael Driver in University of Southern California and Richard Larson in Sweden. And they were looking at what type of career seems to be motivational for some people versus others. And what was quite fascinating is that they found that there's 4 different career types. I mean, this is research of the last 20 years. And we see some people who are motivated by what we call a career expert. I mean, so these are people who are more around the mastery, and they're the people who want to go deep in their domain. This comes from the European guild mentality of the 16th century, 15th century. If I was in Leonardo da Vinci atelier in Florence, I spent the first 10 years of my life just drawing a face. No, sorry, drawing a hand. And then I would spend another 10 years drawing a body. And then when I'm kind of like already in my 50s, I would start drawing faces. And it would only be like before my retirement or in my retirement that I would be able to draw the whole Madonna that would be in different churches there. That's an expert. And the experts are motivated in a very certain way to find satisfaction in their career. Now, the other one is what we call the linear career motivation, which is coming from the Anglo-Saxon approach to career development, which means that up is the way, up is the only way. And these are people that every 2 to 4 years would want to go up the hierarchy, to have a higher level of command, a higher level of influence. This is like the typical American dream of Oprah Winfrey, who was a child of an abused child in Mississippi in a very poor family, who ended up being the richest woman in America, moderating one of the top talk shows in the world. That's a linear career. And these people, if they go for 4 years in their career and they didn't move up, they would start feeling nervous about, like, feeling that they're stuck, that they're stalling their careers. The third one is what we call spiral. And spiral are people who develop a specific mastery in a specific domain or discipline. But then every 5 to 7 years, they would get this itch kind of like in their hand. I mean, they would say, I want to do something differently. I want to do it maybe in the organization or in a different organization. It could be a promotion if I move up, but it could also be at the same level. It could even look like, for some linears, as a demotion, but something that I will do that would allow me to expand my horizons, to self-actualize, to make another turn in that spiral of career development. And in their career, they would have like 5 of those kind of like changes that will happen until they kind of like mature. And then there's the last one, which was research that was found, especially in millennials, but it existed all along there, about people who are what we call transitory career motivator. These are people who are motivated by going from one very extreme to the other. These are the people that one day will be running a restaurant, and then 2 years later, they might be a police officer, and then 3 years later, they might actually become a journalist or an environmental activist. And in fact, the further away these fields are for them, the more satisfying they would find their job to be, the more exciting they would see it. These are people that are fundamentally different than the other 3. And if we're looking at this, one person's heaven is another person's hell, where if you're looking just at the duration of the field, the experts would want to spend their whole life in one domain. The linear would want to go up the chain of commands. The spiral would want to go between fields and change it every 5 to 10 years. And the transitory would want this change every 2 to 4 years. The direction of the movement is different, where the experts would go in depth, the linears would go up, the laterals would go spiral, as we said, and the transitory will not be related. And their motivators are very, very different. The experts want security and expertise. The linear wants the power, achievement, influence. The spiral wants the creativity and the growth, the self-actualization. And the transitory love the change. They love the variety. They love their independence. You only start telling them what to do and they will jump to the next thing. And what is interesting is that when you're looking at that, we need all 4 people in our organizations, because the expert bring us the quality and the commitment, the reliability. These are like the watchmakers that you need to have. You need the linears because they give you the competitiveness. They give you the meeting of deadlines, of goals, of cost efficiencies, the profits. You need the spirals because they are the creative types. They engage more in teamwork. They have more diversity of skills, and they're the best managers to work with because they are very developmentally oriented. And the transitories are the people who give you the speed. They hit the ground running. They're very fast on their feet, and they have the change orientation. So I'm going to ask you again with another poll, again, forcing you to only choose one, and most of us have more than one. If I'm asking you to choose one of the 4, which do you think you are? Are you more of an expert, more of a linear, more of a spiral, or a transitory? So let me just put it up here and ask you to just fill it out. So this is beautiful. Let me stop it here. I mean, I know that some of you are still filling out. Maybe I'll give you another second. Okay. So I'll end the poll and I'll share the results. So can you see the results now? I mean, I hope you could see them.
Yeah, we can see the results.
Okay, so you can see that almost 50% of your spirals. This is amazing. I mean, I would have loved to have met you face to face to kind of like see you and talk to you about what generation you are, where do you come from in the world, all of that that is contributing to you being motivated by being a spiral in your career. Almost equally divided is between experts and linear, 21% for each of those, and then 10% of your transitory. And again, if you're thinking about this, you're motivated very, very differently if you're an expert versus if you're a linear or a spiral or transitory. And that is also true for your people. So let me stop sharing the results and continue just by saying, when you're thinking about your direct reports, you need to think about, are you looking at them as they are? And that is, by the way, if those of you who have children are thinking about your own children, you can also see the same issues there. Are you looking at them for what motivates them? Or are you looking at them through your glasses? Because if an expert is looking at another expert, he sees them as serious people, but wrong because they're not them, right? That's what happens in the faculty of IMD, for instance. We go to a faculty meeting and we argue with each other because we respect each other, but we think that we are better. We know it more. I'm a leadership professor. I know better than the marketing guy. An expert looking at a linear feels that they're empty suits, that they decided more than what they know. When an expert looks at a spiral, they feel like these guys used to be good guys, but they lost focus. And an expert looking at a transitory would see them as jack of all trades and master of none. And if you would look at this table, you will see that almost all of the adjectives are actually negative adjectives. These are not positive descriptions here, which means that we tend to see the world and we tend to see our employees through our own glasses. So I want to conclude this talk by saying, think about your strong and weak performers on your teams and try to think about what are their career concepts. Are they driven by being an expert or a linear or a transitory or a spiral? Are they being satisfied in their job? To what degree is this consistent with you, or are you imposing your views on them? And then what can you do to tap into and respect their career concept and bring the best out in them? So this is very much just like the tip of the iceberg of what's in the book. The book is focusing on motivation, as I said, and we only touched on a little part of that motivation. There's 2 chapters on that in the book. There's a chapter about ability in terms of like allowing you as a manager to better be able to assess the skills that are required for people and where they are with their capabilities. Then there's 2 chapters in the book that focus on psychological capital. This is really the deepest aspect of psychology, going to the self-belief, willpower, all of these deep things. And then last but not least, it's about supportive environment. Do key elements in the working environment are supporting them? So I'm going to finish here and I'll open it to any questions that you folks might have.
Thank you very much. Now the Q&A is open. So for those of you that want to that have any question or comment that would like to share with Shlomo, please feel free to write it in the Q&A. Thank you so much. We have one question. So Jorge Russo, isn't this the classic question that we should treat others as the way they want to be treated and not as we want them to treat us? In my opinion, adaptation, optimization, and customization of behavior profile is the key to effective leadership.
So I think there's a lot in what your question is, but it's not exactly how I would phrase it. I mean, I would say it's the classic question that we should treat others as they want to be treated, is not as we think they want to be treated. Not necessarily as they want to treat them to treat us, but as we assume through our glasses that they will be more like us and therefore they want to be treated this way. It's really about opening up, I mean, and opening the curtains to say, there is this diversity that exists. I need as a manager to be as sensitive as I can to understand the motivation of that individual and then engage in a dialogue, in development, in giving feedback in a way that speaks to them, that's helpful to them. There's another question from Enrico, I think here.
Yes, what role that not just play in changing employees' behavior? Do you believe on them to really change behaviors for a long time?
Right.
Thank you.
So the whole last chapter in the book is actually about nudging. I mean, I didn't have time to describe it here, but we very much looked at all research that has been taking place in the last like 25 years or so around nudging to see what a manager could take from that to nudge the behavior of their people in the direction that is useful, that is helpful for them and for their performance. We actually studied a lot of sort of like gaming industry. So like when we looked at gaming and designers of games, of video games, this is because my children were growing up years ago. I mean, now they're adults in their own right in the world. But when they were growing up, I mean, I was always amazed at how my son sometimes in a very perfectly sunny day in Switzerland that you just want to go and jump and swim in the lake, he would sit in a dark room and play these horrible computer games in which he will be killing people or killing birds, which his mother and I were mortified when we saw that because we thought like that he was a good kid, and suddenly we felt that maybe we lost all hope with him. But we kind of challenged ourselves to see what game designers are doing, and a lot of that is about nudging, and this is something that also managers could do.
Thank you so much. I believe that was the last question. Okay, we have a new one. Thank you so much from Son Taylor. Can we use this to enable the required culture change as we to move to lean operating models, as without culture change, these changes are less impactful?
So it would really depend on the culture of your organization, right? I mean, this is where we need to be very nuanced in this, because there are some organizations that are much more open to diversity and inclusion, that are much more open to trying to think about how to harness the discretionary performance of people. There are some organizations that are much more hierarchical. They're much more about telling people what to do and how to do it. So those organizations would probably need to really think about a cultural change that would be required in order to be able to allow some of those behavioral changes to take place.
Thank you so much. We have another very interesting question from Jesus Diaz de la Hoz. Thank you so much. Did you find out which particular model, X or linear, has a major potential to change employees' behavior, if any?
So I'm not sure that I fully understand the question. I mean,
okay.
I guess my guess will be if one of them is more prone to changing behaviors or not. And I would say that it depends on how strong you are on the anchoring of your style. If you're very, very strong on any of these four, then it will be more difficult for you to change your behavior. If you're more in the middle of that, it would probably be more of a gray zone there. So it would really vary there. But what is important for me to say is that you don't need to change that motivator. You really just want to make sure that your career and your job and your opportunities are aligned with your motivation. And this is only something that you know. So for those 20% of you that felt that you're not being satisfied with that career motivation in your job, then I would say, then try to think about this. What can you do to change it? How could you communicate with your bosses or your others? I mean, and maybe this is not the right environment for you. Maybe this is not the right organization for you.
Thank you so much. We have the next question from Rosa Gress. In your opinion, what is the best way to learn? What is the intrinsic motivation of a certain person?
Well, that would require a whole other hour. So I don't think I can answer about the best ways to learn. I did write a book, and I published a book that is called The Business of Corporate Learning, which is a book that was published by Cambridge Press 10 years ago. And I think that a lot of what I talked about in that book is still relevant in terms of what is the best way to learn. Again, very individually focused, but there are some clear guidelines across the board.
Okay, and now we have the last question again from Enrique Segarra. Don't you think managers should spend much more time understanding their prospect employees before hiring them?
Absolutely. I think that this is one of those things that I'm terrified to see in some organizations, especially organizations that go through a lot of growth. There's some people who say, if it's a warm body, just bring it in because we're going through a growth and we need people. But I think that's a mistake that people make. I think that you need to really study who your people are, what their motivation is, and how that matches the other members of your team. How did that work in combination with other career types in your organization? In some cases, you want to bring different types, and in some cases, you might want to strengthen certain types. So you definitely want to make sure that you're interviewing and hiring also for a fit when it comes to the team and the career aspirations and the motivation.
Totally agree. So Shlomo, thank you very much. And thank you all of you for joining us today. I don't know, Shlomo, if you want to say something as a goodbye for this webinar. It's been very interesting, and we will send a recorded version of this webinar by tomorrow. So thank you very much for keeping in touch with Deusto Business School and with IMD. And I leave you with Shlomo. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to so many of you. I mean, in different parts of the world, and I hope that while you're coming from different cultures, different environments, different countries, different industries, that some of these very basic, foundational, fundamental human phenomena resonate with you, and that this would help you be better managers, better executives who are driving performance in organizations and also increasing the satisfaction of your direct reports in terms of their career aspirations. So thank you very much and have a nice evening.